The fog clung to the pines like a shroud, muting the world into shades of grey as Elena trudged along the overgrown path. The estate loomed behind her, its windows like empty eyes watching her descent into the woods. She'd come to this godforsaken place 6 months ago, seeking refuge from the city's clamour, but the silence here was worse, pregnant with secrets that rustled in the leaves and echoed in the wind. At night, the voices started, soft, insistent murmurs that slithered through the cracks in her cabin walls, whispering fragments of forgotten conversations. Sister, lost, blood in the soil. They pulled at her like invisible threads, urging her deeper into the forest where the trees twisted into grotesque shapes, their branches clawing at the sky. Tonight, the pull was stronger. Her lantern flickered, casting jittery shadows that danced like specters. Elena's breath came in shallow puffs, her mind replaying the face she'd seen earlier that day, the young master, with his sharp jaw and piercing eyes, so eerily similar to her brother Thomas, who vanished years ago in these very woods during a family outing. No one ever found him. The search parties returned empty-handed, muttering about accidents and wild animals. But now, here was this stranger, lording over the estate like he owned the shadows themselves. Why did he look exactly like Thomas? The question gnawed at her, a splinter in her soul. As she pushed further, the voices grew louder, overlapping in a cacophony that made her skin crawl. Branches snapped underfoot like brittle bones, and the air thickened with the scent of damp earth and decay. Suddenly, a clearing emerged, ringed by ancient oaks that seemed to lean in, listening. In the center stood a weathered stone marker, half buried in moss, etched with faded runes that pulsed faintly in the lantern light. Elena knelt, her fingers trembling as she brushed away the dirt. The inscription chilled her, bound by blood, awakened by voice. A low groan rose from the ground, and the whispers sharpened into a scream, her brother's voice, clear as the day he disappeared, calling her name from the dark. The fog clung to the ancient pines like a living shroud, thick and unrelenting, turning the world into a dreamlike haze of muted greys and shifting shadows as Elena made her slow, deliberate way along the narrow, overgrown path that snaked away from the estate. Each step felt heavier than the last, her boots sinking slightly into the damp earth, the chill seeping through the worn leather and into her bones. Behind her, the grand old manor house loomed on the hillside, its tall windows dark and watchful, like hollow eyes tracking her every movement as she descended deeper into the woods that pressed in from all sides. She had arrived at this isolated place 6 months earlier, fleeing the relentless noise and chaos of the city in search of quiet, of healing after years of grief that still gnawed at her insides. But the silence here was not the peaceful kind she had imagined. It was oppressive, heavy with unspoken things, alive with rustles in the underbrush and sighs carried on the wind through the twisted branches overhead. Night after night, as she lay in her small caretaker's cabin on the edge of the property, the voices began. They started faintly, almost imperceptibly, slipping through the thin wooden walls like smoke under a door, soft, insistent murmurs that seemed to rise from the forest itself. At first, she told herself it was the wind playing tricks, or perhaps animals foraging in the dark, but the sounds grew clearer with each passing evening, weaving into patterns that chilled her to the core. They whispered fragments that tugged at buried memories, her name spoken in a tone both familiar and distant, words like sister, lost, come closer, and stranger still, phrases about blood in the soil and promises unbroken. The voices were never loud, never demanding in the way of human shouts, but they carried an undeniable pull, a magnetic urgency that coiled around her thoughts and refused to let go. Some nights, she pressed her hands over her ears, curling tightly under the thin blanket, yet the murmurs persisted, threading into her dreams and leaving her waking in cold sweat, heart pounding as if she had been running. Tonight, the pull felt stronger than ever, almost physical, like invisible fingers gently but firmly guiding her hand to the door latch, urging her out into the cold December air despite the rational voice in her head screaming to stay inside, to lock the door and ignore it all. She had resisted for weeks, but the whispers had grown more intimate, more pleading, laced with a sorrow that mirrored her own lingering pain over her brother's disappearance years ago. Lantern in hand, its flame flickering nervously against the encroaching dark, Elena stepped onto the path, the fog swallowing her figure almost immediately as the trees closed in, their gnarled trunks emerging like silent sentinels from the mist. The air smelled of wet pine needles and decaying leaves, thick and earthy, and every small sound, the snap of a twig, the distant hoot of an owl amplified in the stillness, sending prickles across her skin. Yet she kept walking, drawn forward by those ethereal voices that now seemed to swirl around her, closer than ever, beckoning her deeper into the heart of the woods where secrets long buried waited in the shadows. Say this title for YouTube video. My targeted audience, United States. Why does young master look exactly like my brother? The slave's question hanged the overseer optimized YouTube title suggestions. Your original title is intriguing and hooks with mystery drama, which works well for short Chinese dramas, common on platforms like Real Short Drama Box. For a US audience, these videos perform best with clickbait-style hooks that emphasize shock, revenge, rebirth, or emotional twists often seen in viral minidrama clips. Good YouTube SEO for this niche includes front-loading the hook, question or shocking statement for mobile viewers, adding searchable terms like Chinese drama, mini-drama, short drama, or full episode if applicable. Emojis, red heart hashtag fire, face screaming in fear, for visual pop in recommendations. Keeping under -60 characters for full display. Here are my top optimized versions, ranked by potential virality SEO balance. Face screaming in fear. Why does the young master look exactly like my brother? Slave's question dooms overseer. Fire Chinese short drama. Strong hook with capitalization for emphasis. Adds genre keywords for search. People search Chinese short drama a lot in the US. Slave asks, young master, why do you look just like my dead brother? Face screaming in fear. Overseer gets hanged. Reborn revenge drama. Builds curiosity plus reveals the dramatic outcome, hanging, to entice clicks. Includes reborn revenge, super popular in this genre. Many top videos feature rebirth themes. Young master looks exactly like my brother. Slave's bold question leads to overseer's execution. Red heart hashtag fire mini Chinese drama. Direct quote for intrigue. Mini Chinese drama is a high search term for dubbed short-form content in the US. Shocking twist. Slave discovers young master is her brother's twin. Face screaming in fear. Overseer hanged. Full short drama. Uses shocking twist, common in viral titles. Full short drama helps if it's a complete story clip. Why young master resembles my lost brother. Slave's question ends. Overseer forever fire. Emotional Chinese drama short. Tips for maximum reach, US audience. Thumbnail, close-up of shocked slave face plus young master, with text overlay like looks like my brother, or overseer hanged. Description, start with the hook, add timestamps if multipart, include keywords like Chinese mini-drama sub, rebirth drama, revenge story. Hashtags, #Chinese drama, #short drama, #mini-drama, #revenge drama, #drama shorts, #viral drama. Test uploading as a short, vertical, for algorithm push. These niches explode there. These should boost clicks and views significantly. If it's part of a series, add part 1 or episode info. Let me know if you want description #ideas too. Please generate an engaging or spine-chilling story. Please only intro story. On this topic, why does the young master look exactly like my brother? Slave's question dooms overseer. Chinese short drama. Voices in the dark, a mystery hidden in the woods. Provide 10 key turning points for the story before crafting the full introduction. Ensure the story embodies the style of author or filmmaker name, capturing their tone, suspense, and atmosphere, but do not mention their name anywhere in the story. Also, do not add subheadings in the introduction. The protagonist, a young woman working as a caretaker in a remote estate surrounded by dense woods, hears faint whispers at night that seem to call her name, drawing her into the forest against her better judgment. She discovers an old, abandoned cabin in the woods where she finds a faded photograph of a man who looks identical to her long-lost brother, presumed dead in a childhood accident. Back at the estate, she confronts the young master, who bears an uncanny resemblance to the man in the photo and her brother, but he dismisses her questions with cold indifference. The overseer, a stern and secretive figure who manages the estate, overhears her suspicions and warns her to stay silent, hinting at dark family secrets buried in the woods. Strange events escalate, objects move on their own, shadows whisper forgotten memories, and she experiences vivid nightmares of a ritual in the forest involving her brother. She uncovers hidden journals in the estate's attic revealing that the young master was adopted under mysterious circumstances, with ties to an ancient curse linked to the woods. A midnight venture into the woods leads her to a hidden grave, where she digs up evidence suggesting her brother didn't die but was sacrificed by the overseer's ancestors. The overseer attacks her to protect the secret, but the voices in the dark intervene, revealing themselves as echoes of trapped souls, including her brother's. In a climactic confrontation, she accuses the young master of being her brother's doppelganger created by the curse, leading to the overseer's downfall as the spirits exact revenge. The story resolves with her escaping the estate, but the whispers follow her, implying the mystery in the woods is far from over and may claim her next. The fog clung to the pines like a shroud, muting the world into shades of grey as Elena trudged along the overgrown path. The estate loomed behind her, its windows like empty eyes watching her descent into the woods. She'd come to this godforsaken place 6 months ago, seeking refuge from the city's clamor, but the silence here was worse, pregnant with secrets that rustled in the leaves and echoed in the wind. At night, the voices started, soft, insistent murmurs that slithered through the cracks in her cabin walls, whispering fragments of forgotten conversations. Sister, lost, blood in the soil. They pulled at her like invisible threads, urging her deeper into the forest where the trees twisted into grotesque shapes, their branches clawing at the sky. Tonight, the pull was stronger. Her lantern flickered, casting jittery shadows that danced like specters. Elena's breath came in shallow puffs, her mind replaying the face she'd seen earlier that day, the young master, with his sharp jaw and piercing eyes, so eerily similar to her brother Thomas, who vanished years ago in these very woods during a family outing. No one ever found him. The search parties returned empty-handed, muttering about accidents and wild animals. But now, here was this stranger, lording over the estate like he owned the shadows themselves. Why did he look exactly like Thomas? The question gnawed at her, a splinter in her soul. As she pushed further, the voices grew louder, overlapping in a cacophony that made her skin crawl. Branches snapped underfoot like brittle bones, and the air thickened with the scent of damp earth and decay. Suddenly, a clearing emerged, ringed by ancient oaks that seemed to lean in, listening. In the center stood a weathered stone marker, half buried in moss, etched with faded runes that pulsed faintly in the lantern light. Elena knelt, her fingers trembling as she brushed away the dirt. The inscription chilled her, bound by blood, awakened by voice. A low groan rose from the ground, and the whispers sharpened into a scream, her brother's voice, clear as the day he disappeared, calling her name from the dark. Explain key point number 1 into 450 words, without any subheadings or ending sentence. The fog clung to the ancient pines like a living shroud, thick and unrelenting, turning the world into a dreamlike haze of muted greys and shifting shadows as Elena made her slow, deliberate way along the narrow, overgrown path that snaked away from the estate. Each step felt heavier than the last, her boots sinking slightly into the damp earth, the chill seeping through the worn leather and into her bones. Behind her, the grand old manor house loomed on the hillside, its tall windows dark and watchful, like hollow eyes tracking her every movement as she descended deeper into the woods that pressed in from all sides. She had arrived at this isolated place 6 months earlier, fleeing the relentless noise and chaos of the city in search of quiet, of healing after years of grief that still gnawed at her insides. But the silence here was not the peaceful kind she had imagined. It was oppressive, heavy with unspoken things, alive with rustles in the underbrush and sighs carried on the wind through the twisted branches overhead. Night after night, as she lay in her small caretaker's cabin on the edge of the property, the voices began. They started faintly, almost imperceptibly, slipping through the thin wooden walls like smoke under a door, soft, insistent murmurs that seemed to rise from the forest itself. At first, she told herself it was the wind playing tricks, or perhaps animals foraging in the dark, but the sounds grew clearer with each passing evening, weaving into patterns that chilled her to the core. They whispered fragments that tugged at buried memories, her name spoken in a tone both familiar and distant, words like sister, lost, come closer, and stranger still, phrases about blood in the soil and promises unbroken. The voices were never loud, never demanding in the way of human shouts, but they carried an undeniable pull, a magnetic urgency that coiled around her thoughts and refused to let go. Some nights, she pressed her hands over her ears, curling tightly under the thin blanket, Yet the murmurs persisted, threading into her dreams and leaving her waking in cold sweat, heart pounding as if she had been running. Tonight, the pull felt stronger than ever, almost physical, like invisible fingers gently but firmly guiding her hand to the door latch, urging her out into the cold December air despite the rational voice in her head screaming to stay inside, to lock the door and ignore it all. She had resisted for weeks, but the whispers had grown more intimate, more pleading, laced with a sorrow that mirrored her own lingering pain over her brother's disappearance years ago. Lantern in hand, its flame flickering nervously against the encroaching dark, Elena stepped onto the path, the fog swallowing her figure almost immediately as the trees closed in, their gnarled trunks emerging like silent sentinels from the mist. The air smelled of wet pine needles and decaying leaves, thick and earthy, and every small sound, the snap of a twig, the distant hoot of an owl amplified in the stillness, sending prickles across her skin. Yet she kept walking, drawn forward by those ethereal voices that now seemed to swirl around her, closer than ever, beckoning her deeper into the heart of the woods where secrets long buried waited in the shadows. Explain key point number 2 into 450 words, without any subheadings or ending sentence. Deeper into the woods the following night, the fog had lifted just enough to let a pale sliver of moonlight filter through the canopy, silvering the frost on the ground as Elena pressed on, her lantern now dimmed to save oil. The voices had quieted since the previous evening, replaced by an expectant hush that felt almost watchful, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. She told herself she was only checking the boundary markers, a caretaker's duty, but her feet carried her along a faint trail she had never noticed before, one that wound between ancient oaks whose roots buckled the earth like the knuckles of buried giants. The air grew colder with every step, sharp enough to sting her lungs, and the scent of pine gave way to something older, damp soil disturbed long ago, mingled with the faint metallic tang of rust. After what felt like hours, the trees parted abruptly into a small clearing she had never seen on any estate map. At its center stood a cabin, little more than a sagging shell swallowed by ivy and time. The roof had partially collapsed, exposing blackened beams to the sky, and the single door hung crooked on leather hinges that creaked softly in the breeze. Elena hesitated on the threshold, heart hammering against her ribs, but the silence from within seemed to invite her forward. She stepped inside, the floorboards groaning beneath her weight, and raised her lantern to chase away the gloom. Dust motes danced in the weak light, settling on overturned furniture and shattered crockery. A stone hearth gaped cold and empty, its mantel cracked. Her gaze swept the ruined room until it snagged on something pinned beneath a fallen shelf, a small wooden frame, its glass spiderwebbed but intact. With trembling fingers, she eased it free, wiping away layers of grime that smeared like old blood across the surface. What emerged beneath made the lantern waver in her grip. It was a photograph, faded sepia, the edges curled from decades of damp. A young man stared out at her, posed stiffly in front of these very woods, wearing a high-collared coat that belonged to another era. His face was unmistakable, the same sharp jawline, the same dark eyes set a fraction too wide, the same slight asymmetry in the mouth that Thomas had always joked about, calling it his crooked smile. Elena's breath caught in her throat as memories flooded back, her brother at 17, laughing on the day he disappeared, wearing that exact expression. The resemblance was not merely close, it was identical, down to the faint scar that cut through the left eyebrow, a mark Thomas had earned falling from an apple tree when they were children. She turned the frame over with numb hands. On the back, scrawled in ink now browned with age, were words that sent ice through her veins: Elias Blackwood, 1897. The young master of the estate today bore the same surname, the same face, as if time had folded in on itself. The photograph seemed to pulse with cold beneath her fingertips, and for a moment the cabin air thickened, pressing against her chest. Outside, a branch cracked sharply in the stillness, and when she looked up, shadows shifted beyond the broken window as though something had just drawn closer to watch her discovery. The voices remained silent, but their absence felt heavier than any whisper, a deliberate pause that left her alone with the impossible image of a man who could not exist. The next morning broke cold and brittle, a thin crust of frost glazing the estate lawns as Elena emerged from her cabin, the faded photograph tucked deep inside her coat pocket like a burning coal. Sleep had evaded her entirely. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Thomas's face staring out from that sepia frame, superimposed over the young master's features she had glimpsed only in passing since her arrival. She had avoided the main house until now, content with her solitary duties, tending the overgrown gardens, mending fences, keeping to the edges of this vast property, but the weight of the discovery pressed her forward, up the gravel drive toward the towering stone facade that seemed to brood beneath a slate-gray sky. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of polished wood and old smoke. Servants moved silently through the corridors, eyes lowered, as though the house itself demanded deference. Elena was directed to the library, where the young master reportedly spent his mornings. She hesitated at the threshold, heart thudding so loudly she feared it would echo off the leather-bound walls. He sat at a broad mahogany desk beneath tall windows, morning light cutting sharp angles across his profile. When he looked up, the resemblance struck her like a physical blow, the same dark hair falling slightly over the forehead, the same narrow nose, the same faint scar threading through the left brow. For an instant, the room tilted, and she saw Thomas at 17, alive and breathing, turning toward her with that familiar half-smile. "May I help you?" His voice was low, cultured, edged with the cool distance of someone accustomed to command. There was no warmth in it, only a mild curiosity that quickly hardened into something guarded as she stepped closer. Elena's fingers tightened around the photograph in her pocket. The words tangled in her throat before spilling out, raw and unsteady. "Forgive my boldness, sir, but you look exactly like someone I knew. My brother. He disappeared in these woods years ago." She drew the frame out with shaking hands, holding it toward him like an offering. "This was taken in 1897. Elias Blackwood. The face is identical to yours." To his. He rose slowly, the chair scraping against the floor in the hushed room. His gaze flicked to the photograph, and for the briefest moment something flickered across his features, recognition, perhaps, or irritation swiftly masked. Then his expression settled into polished indifference, the corners of his mouth tightening. A trick of light and old photography, nothing more. Resemblances across generations are common enough in these parts. He did not reach for the image. Instead, he turned away, moving to the window as if dismissing both her and the past she carried. "You've been working alone too long out there. The woods play games with the mind. I suggest you return to your duties and leave ancestral portraits to those who understand them." The coldness in his tone sliced deeper than any shout could have. Elena stood rooted, the photograph still extended, feeling the vast gulf between them widen into an abyss. Outside the window, bare branches clawed at the glass, and somewhere far off in the forest a crow cried once, sharp and solitary. The young master did not turn back, his silhouette framed against the pale light like a figure carved from ice, untouchable and remote, while the question burned unanswered in the air between them that same afternoon, as Elena descended the grand staircase with the photograph still clutched in her hand. A heavy tread echoed behind her in the corridor. She turned to find Mr. Harrow, the overseer, blocking the way like a wall of shadow. He was a broad man in his late 50s, face weathered into deep furrows, eyes small and pale beneath a perpetual crease of brow. His dark coat was always buttoned to the throat no matter the weather, and he carried the faint smell of damp earth and pipe smoke wherever he went. The other servants spoke of him only in lowered voices, calling him the estate's true master, for the young lord deferred to him in all practical matters. Harrow's gaze dropped to the frame in her fingers, and something tightened across his features, a flicker too swift to name. He reached out without asking and plucked the photograph from her grasp, turning it over once as though confirming a fear. "Where did you get this?" His voice was low, almost gentle, but it carried the weight of iron beneath velvet. "I found it," Elena answered, her throat dry. "In the woods. There's a cabin. You were told to keep to the marked paths." He cut her off quietly, yet the words landed like a reprimand carved in stone. He handed the photograph back, but his fingers brushed hers longer than necessary, cold and deliberate. "Some things out there are best left sleeping." She lifted her chin, the question that had tormented her since morning surging forward. "The man in the picture, Elias Blackwood, he looks exactly like the young master. Exactly like my brother who vanished here years ago." "How can that be?" Harrow studied her for a long moment, the corridor silent except for the distant tick of a grandfather clock. When he spoke again, his tone had softened into something almost paternal, yet it chilled her more than anger would have. Families in these parts share bloodlines that twist back centuries. Likenesses repeat. Photographs fade and trick the eye. He stepped closer, lowering his voice until she felt it against her ear. But there are older matters tied to this land, matters the Blackwoods have guarded since before the house was built. Debts paid in silence. Oaths kept in shadow. His pale eyes bored into hers, unblinking. Ask too loudly, girl, and you'll stir what should stay buried. The woods listen. The house listens. And some questions, once spoken, can't be taken back. He placed a heavy hand on her shoulder, the grip firm enough to still any retreat. Go back to your cabin. Burn that picture if you're wise. Speak of it to no one, especially not to him. His gaze flicked upward toward the library doors, where the young master still Saturday. There are secrets here that have cost lives before, and they'll claim more if disturbed. The pressure of his hand lingered even after he released her, a warning branded into her skin. As he turned away, his boots thudding down the hall, Elena stood frozen on the cold marble, the photograph trembling in her grip. Somewhere deep in the walls, the house seemed to exhale, and from the windows overlooking the forest, the bare branches swayed though no wind stirred the air. The overseer's words coiled around her thoughts in the days that followed. The estate seemed to contract around Elena like a living thing, its corridors narrower, its shadows deeper, as though the house itself resented her questions. She performed her duties mechanically, pruning dead roses in the frozen garden, sweeping leaves from the portico, but her mind was elsewhere, tangled in the photograph she had hidden beneath a loose floorboard in her cabin. At night, the voices returned, no longer content with whispers. They rose in layers, overlapping, urgent, threading through her dreams until she woke gasping, sheets twisted around her like restraints. The strange events began subtly. A porcelain figurine on the mantel in the servants' hall toppled without touch, shattering into dust-fine pieces that spelled nothing yet felt deliberate. Her lantern, left hanging on a hook, swung gently long after she had passed, as if nudged by an unseen hand. In the mirrors of the upper landings, reflections lagged a fraction behind her movements, faces in the glass holding expressions she had already released. And always, beneath the ordinary creak of old wood, came the faint scrape of something dragging across floors above when no one walked there. The nightmares arrived fully formed, vivid as memory. She stood in the woods under a moonless sky, surrounded by robed figures whose faces were lost in shadow. At the center lay a stone altar slick with dark fluid, and upon it her brother Thomas, eyes wide and pleading, mouth moving soundlessly as the figures chanted in a language that hurt to hear. A blade gleamed above him, held by hands she could not see, and just as it descended she would jerk awake, throat raw from suppressed screams, the metallic taste of blood on her tongue though she had bitten nothing. During waking hours, shadows behaved unnaturally. In the long gallery, portraits of past Blackwoods seemed to track her passage, eyes shifting imperceptibly when she turned away. One afternoon, while dusting the library the young master had abandoned, she found a book lying open on the floor though she had shelved it hours earlier. Its pages fluttered to a woodcut illustration, a circle of hooded figures around an altar in a clearing, the same scene from her dreams rendered in crude black lines. Beneath it, in faded ink, someone had scrawled, "The debt renews with blood willingly given or taken." That evening, as dusk bled into the windows, Elena paused on the back staircase and heard it clearly, a low murmur not from the woods but from within the walls themselves, words in Thomas's voice repeating fragments of childhood games they had played. "Hide deep, sister, they're coming, don't let them see." The sound moved through the plaster like breath through lungs. She pressed her palm to the cold wall and felt a faint vibration, as though something vast and patient stirred just beyond the lath and horsehair. The air grew heavy with the scent of turned earth and old iron, and for a moment the staircase lights dimmed, flames guttering in their sconces though no draught stirred. When they flared again, a single handprint, too small to be an adult's, had appeared on the banister beside her, fingers splayed in damp soil that had not been there moments before. The voices fell silent then, leaving only the thunder of her pulse and the growing certainty that the house was remembering things it had been told to forget. With the nightmares growing more insistent and the house's strange behaviors pressing closer, Elena could no longer confine her search to daylight hours. One moonless night, when the wind rattled the cabin windows like impatient fingers, she waited until the estate fell into deepest silence, then slipped into the main house through the servants' entrance she had left unlatched. Her lantern turned low, She climbed the narrow back stairs to the attic, a place no one had entered in years according to the dust-thick cobwebs that draped the door like funeral veils. The air up there was colder, stale with the breath of forgotten things, and the floorboards groaned beneath her weight as though protesting the intrusion. She moved between stacked trunks and sheet-draped furniture, the feeble light picking out shapes that seemed to shift just beyond the glow. In the farthest corner, beneath a sloping eave where rain had long ago seeped through to stain the plaster black, she found a small iron-bound chest half hidden behind a cracked mirror. The lock had rusted through, it crumbled at her touch. Inside, wrapped in oilskin to protect against damp, lay a stack of journals bound in cracked leather, their pages brittle and yellowed. Elena carried the topmost volume to the weak circle of lantern light and opened it with reverent care. The handwriting was spidery, hurried, dated over a century ago. The entries chronicled the Blackwood family's arrival on this land, the building of the house, and then, in increasingly agitated prose, references to an ancient pact made with something that dwelled beneath the woods. Phrases leaped out at her, the debt of blood renewed each turning of the wheel, a vessel prepared in secret, the child taken to spare the line. Further pages detailed the adoption of an infant boy in 1897, Elias Blackwood, brought to the estate under cover of night with no record of birth, no family name offered. The writer, a great-aunt driven half-mad by what she had witnessed, described rituals in the clearing, offerings to silence the voices that rose from the soil, and a curse that demanded a life every generation lest the land reclaim all who dwelt upon it. As she read, the attic air grew heavier, thick with the scent of turned earth though no window was open. The journal trembled in her grip when she reached an entry describing the chosen substitute, a boy from a visiting family, lured into the woods and never seen again, his likeness later mirrored in the adopted heir as though the curse had stolen his face to wear upon its own chosen vessel. Sketches filled the margins, hooded figures, the stone marker she had found, the altar slick and dark. One page bore a pressed lock of hair, still dark, tied with faded ribbon. Elena's breath clouded before her as the temperature plunged, and from the rafters above came the soft creak of wood expanding in cold that was not natural. The lantern flame guttered, throwing the shadows into frantic motion, and for an instant she thought she saw pale fingers reaching from behind the stacked crates. The journals seemed to pulse faintly against her palms, as though alive with the weight of secrets too long confined, secrets that now stirred in the dark, awake and listening to every heartbeat in the attic's frozen air. The journals had named the place, a hollow beneath 3 lightning-scarred oaks, where the ground stayed soft even in deepest frost because something beneath it refused to freeze. Elena waited for a night when the sky hung low and starless, the kind of darkness that swallowed sound. She left the house without a lantern this time, letting the faint glow of snow on the ground guide her, the photograph and one of the journals pressed against her heart beneath her coat. The woods accepted her silently, branches parting as though they had been expecting her return. She found the hollow exactly where the sketches showed, a shallow depression ringed by the 3 blackened trees, their trunks split long ago as if struck by more than lightning. At its center the earth rose in a low mound, unmarked except for a single flat stone half buried at one end. The air here felt thick, almost liquid, and every breath tasted of iron. Kneeling, she brushed away the thin crust of snow and began to dig with the small trowel she had taken from the gardener's shed. The soil came up dark and loamy, strangely warm against her frozen fingers, releasing a sweet-rot stench that made her stomach lurch. Deeper, the earth grew wetter, clinging to the blade in heavy clots. At little more than 2 feet down the trowel struck something soft yet unyielding. She scraped wider, heart battering against her ribs, and uncovered a scrap of rotted fabric once blue, the color their mother had sewn into Thomas's coat the year he vanished. A child's coat. Her hands shook so violently she nearly dropped the trowel. More fabric appeared, then small buttons of bone, and finally, wedged against what might have been a rib, a silver locket she herself had given Thomas on his 10th birthday. She pried it open with numb fingers. Inside, beneath cracked glass, was the tiny photograph of them both, arms slung around each other, grinning the way only children can before the world teaches them fear. The ground shuddered beneath her knees, a slow, deliberate pulse like a sleeper turning over. From the surrounding trees came a low exhaling sigh, not wind but breath, warm and sour against the back of her neck. Snow sifted from branches that had not moved. The voices, absent for days, returned all at once, no longer pleading but triumphant, overlapping in a rising chorus that used Thomas's mouth, her mother's, voices she did not recognize yet somehow knew. The soil around the shallow grave darkened further, spreading outward in widening rings as though drinking something poured long ago. Elena rocked back on her heels, the locket clenched so tightly its edges cut her palm, blood welling hot and immediate. Somewhere beneath her the earth shifted again, deeper this time, a slow grinding of stone on stone, and the realization settled into her bones. Her brother had never wandered off, never fallen, never been lost. He had been taken, planted here like a seed to feed whatever waited below, and the debt had worn his face ever since, smiling from portraits and photographs while the true boy rotted in secret. The mound gave another slow heave, exhaling centuries of patience, and the darkness above the trees thickened as though the night itself leaned down to watch what came next. Dawn came grey and sullen, the snow underfoot crusted with a thin, treacherous glaze as Elena stumbled back from the hollow, the locket still clenched in her blood-smeared fist. The voices had quieted again, but their silence rang louder than any chorus, a deliberate hush that followed her through the trees like a held breath. She did not return to her cabin. Instead, driven by a fury that burned colder than the wind, she went straight to the main house, boots leaving dark prints across the pristine portico. The overseer was in the stables, overseeing the grooming of the black gelding the young master favored. He turned when she approached, his broad face tightening at the sight of her, hair wild, eyes hollow, hands stained with earth and blood. She did not speak at first. She simply opened her palm and let the locket fall into the straw at his feet. It landed with a dull glint, the cracked glass catching the weak light from the open doors. Harrow stared at it for a long moment, color draining beneath the weathered skin. Then he moved, faster than his bulk suggested, lunging to seize her arm in a grip like iron. "You foolish girl," he hissed, dragging her deeper into the shadows between the stalls where the horses shifted uneasily. "You were warned." His free hand clamped over her mouth as she tried to scream, the smell of earth and tobacco overwhelming. He hauled her toward the tack room, muttering about loose ends and debts unpaid. But the moment his fingers touched her lips, the air changed. The temperature plummeted sharply, frost blooming across the wooden walls in frantic spirals. The horses whinnied in sudden terror, rearing against their halters. From every corner of the stable came a low susurrus, rising swiftly into a multitude of voices, some childish, some ancient, all threaded with unmistakable rage. Harrow froze. His grip loosened as the whispers coalesced into recognizable words, names, dates, fragments of rituals spoken long ago in the clearing. One voice stood apart, clearer than the rest, Thomas's, no longer pleading but commanding, cold as the grave from which it rose. Shadows detached themselves from the rafters, lengthening, thickening into vague shapes that drifted closer. The overseer released Elena with a choked sound, stumbling back as pale hands, translucent yet solid enough to grasp, emerged from the gloom. They were small hands, a child's, then an old woman's, then dozens more, all reaching for him with deliberate patience. He swung wildly, breath coming in ragged bursts, but his fists passed through mist that reformed instantly. The voices spoke in unison now, reciting the terms of the old pact, the betrayal, the blood taken without consent. Frost crawled up his legs, rooting him in place. Elena backed away, pressed against a stall door, watching as the ethereal fingers closed around his throat, his wrists, lifting him slightly so his boots scraped helplessly against the straw. His eyes bulged, face purpling, yet no sound escaped except a wet gurgle. The shadows tightened, and something cracked softly in the stillness. Harrow's body went limp, held upright only by the unseen grasp, eyes fixed in permanent shock. The voices softened then, almost tender, as the darkness folded gently around him, drawing him down into the packed earth floor that rippled like water accepting a stone. When the mist cleared moments later, only scuffed straw remained where he had stood, and the cold began to lift as though a door had closed somewhere deep below. Elena stood alone amid the restless horses, the locket warm against her chest, the stable doors creaking open to a morning that suddenly felt too bright. The young master stood alone in the library when Elena entered, the afternoon light slanting through frost-laced windows and catching on the sharp angles of his face. He looked up from the desk, irritation flickering across features that were Thomas's and yet not too polished, too still, like a portrait given breath. The room smelled of old paper and dying fire, but beneath it lingered the damp earth scent that now followed her everywhere. She closed the doors behind her with deliberate quiet, the click echoing like a seal. He rose slowly, sensing the shift in the air. "You look unwell," he said, voice smooth as polished stone. "Perhaps you should rest." Elena stepped forward, the locket now hanging openly at her throat, its silver chain dark with old blood. "I know what you are," she said, the words steady despite the tremor in her limbs. "You wear my brother's face because they took him. They buried him in the hollow to feed the thing beneath the oaks, and in return it gave you his likeness so the debt would seem paid. Elias Blackwood died before he was born. You were made to carry what was stolen." His expression did not change at first, only a subtle tightening around the eyes, the way a mask might crease. Then something ancient moved behind the gaze, patient and cold. "You've been reading things you shouldn't," he murmured. "Listening to voices that lie." The temperature in the room plunged. Books shifted on their shelves with soft thuds, pages fluttering as though turned by unseen hands. Frost spidered across the window panes from the inside, delicate ferns of ice blooming in seconds. From the walls came the chorus again, stronger now, rising through the plaster, children's voices layered over older ones, all speaking the same accusation. The young master's composure cracked. He pressed a hand to his temple as though warding off a sudden pain. Elena advanced another step. "They've come for the keeper of the lie. Harrow is already gone. The ground took him for guarding what was never his to guard." His head snapped toward her, real fear breaking through the borrowed features. "You don't understand what you've unleashed." His voice cracked on the last word, slipping into something younger, frightened Thomas's voice for a fleeting heartbeat before the mask resealed. Shadows pooled in the corners, thickening into columns that swayed like smoke given weight. Pale shapes drifted forward, hands outstretched, faces indistinct yet achingly familiar. The young master backed against the desk, breath coming in sharp bursts as frost coated his sleeves. The voices sharpened into a single, relentless demand: balance, return, release. Books tumbled from shelves in a sudden cascade, burying his feet. The fire in the grate guttered out with a hiss, plunging the room into grey half-light. He reached toward Elena, fingers trembling. "Help me," he whispered, and for an instant the plea was entirely Thomas's, raw and desperate. Then the shadows closed in, wrapping around him like roots seeking water, pulling him down through the rug, through the floorboards, into the dark beneath the house that had always hungered. His final cry was swallowed by the chorus as the frost claimed the last of his outline, leaving only scuffed papers and an empty chair swaying gently in air that suddenly felt warmer. The voices quieted to a satisfied murmur, and the library settled into stillness, waiting for whatever debt might come due next. Snow had begun to fall again as Elena left the library, fat flakes drifting past the windows like ash from a burned letter. The house felt hollow now, its corridors echoing with a silence deeper than any she had known before. The young master gone, the overseer gone, the voices finally stilled. She moved through rooms that seemed to watch her departure with indifferent eyes, portraits staring from walls that no longer breathed. In the entrance hall she paused only long enough to pull on her old coat, the locket still warm against her skin, Thomas's small photograph inside it the only thing she carried away. Outside, the estate grounds lay muffled under fresh white, the gravel drive already softening into oblivion. She did not look back at the manor as she walked, yet she felt its weight recede slowly, like a stone sinking through dark water. The woods waited at the edge of the lawn, pines heavy with snow, their branches bowed in submission. She followed the path she had taken so many times, boots crunching through the crust, breath pluming white in the frigid air. The hollow lay ahead, the 3 scarred oaks standing sentinel, but she veered away from it, choosing instead the narrower trail that led toward the outer gate and the world beyond. Half a mile from the estate boundary, the first whisper returned. It was faint at first, almost lost beneath the hush of falling snow, a single word shaped like her name, spoken from somewhere just behind her left shoulder. She stopped, heart stuttering, and turned. Nothing moved except the snow settling on bare branches. Yet the air felt crowded suddenly, as though unseen travelers walked the same path, keeping pace. She pressed on, faster now, the gate's rusted iron finally appearing through the flakes like a promise. The whisper came again, clearer, layered with others, some pleading, some warning, all threaded with the unmistakable cadence of Thomas's voice. They did not rise in anger or demand, they simply accompanied her, soft as snowfall on wool. When she reached the gate and pushed it open, hinges screaming in protest, the voices slipped through with her, unhurried. Beyond lay the narrow country road, tire tracks already filling, leading toward distant lights she had not seen in months. She walked until the estate vanished entirely behind curtains of white, until the pines thinned and gave way to open fields. Yet the whispers remained, traveling beneath her coat, curling around her thoughts like smoke that refused to disperse. They spoke fragments now, memories of laughter in summer meadows, warnings about debts unfinished, gentle reminders that blood once spilled does not wash cleanly away. The snow kept falling, erasing her footprints almost as quickly as she made them, and still the voices followed, patient as roots seeking deeper soil. Somewhere ahead, the road curved toward town and warmth and ordinary life, but the murmurs suggested otherwise, hinting that the woods had only released her far enough to carry their secret further, that the mystery bound to the land might yet find new earth in which to grow. The cold deepened as night gathered, and the whispers settled closer, intimate and unending, threading through every breath she took on the long road home.